This is population and migration. A look at just where are people living in the world, why are they living there, how did they get there, with the migration part. So here we go. First, a solid sneeze to start us off here. First, where people live is called ecumen. It's where people can live permanently. They basically people live wherever they can get food, water, and shelter easily. That sounds pretty self-explanatory. But that is gets complex because a decent amount of the world, think water, is either too hot, too cold, too dry. I love my polar bear picture there. Too wet or too high. It just doesn't always work all over the place. And so a lot of the world is uninhabitable, although we are making more and more of the world habitable. Think about Minnesota. It's really cold here in the winter. And then think of that we just the world is changing also with ecumen, that is floodwater. As the oceans rise, well, that will make some parts of the world not as livable as they were before. It also can come down to access to infrastructure or resources as well. So things like roads, that we are more often settled by roads. So if you look at like a distribution map of how urban areas expand, you're going to see that more often than not they expand closer to highways or closer to public transportation and things like that. Now, you can also have government policies making it more difficult, whether that is migration policies here most often, but it could also be job policies that in the 1960s, you had a large amount of people move from Turkey to Germany. Why? Because the two countries worked together to create what was known as a guest worker program, which is something we'll investigate in migration. So let's look at where people live here a little bit more. So something to think about here: 7 regions with equal populations with current population. Think about this. You take all the areas in green. All areas in green, that equals this red or this orange or this blue spot. It takes all of Europe, basically all of the Middle East, to equal that one orange spot. There are so many more people that live inside this little circle down here. Let me show you this. More people live inside that circle than outside of it. And that includes China and India, the biggest two countries in the world, Indonesia, Vietnam, which are all in the top 10 as well. Japan in the top 10. You have so many different areas here. This is like in Pakistan as well. You have so many different countries within this that more people live inside of that than outside of that. That's because for a lot of reasons. One, it's a good spot of latitude. Now it's a little dated here, but the concept still holds true that the climate is pretty temperate there. The climate is pretty temperate. Doesn't Longitude doesn't really have anything to do with where people live. It has more to do with climate. More to do with climate. We're not going to live at the poles. Okay. Now, next, spheres of influence. More than half the people live inside that circle, but then also the mega cities within there are massive. You have so many different mega cities that were in that circle. And so you just have more people are living in cities be it ever before. Why? It's access to infrastructure, it's access to resources. If I go back here, you can also see that, yes, some of it's pollution, but now you also have some people moving out of the city because of that pollution and the price of housing. So people who work in San Francisco, in the middle of California, there are some people that commute from Oregon for that. Population percentages here, you can see it. China and India are by far the biggest two. I've always thought with this, it's always fascinating to me that China and India, either one of them, could essentially, not completely, but could be close to lose 1 billion people, and they would still be one of the top two countries on the planet in terms of population. That's how far back the United States is than those two. Same thing, just shown graphically different. Now, this is as time moves forward here. So something to look at here. This goes back to what we saw on our more people live inside that bubble than outside of it. That in 1950, so many, we have five, of the top 10 countries in the world are in Europe. That's not even close to true. And basically, this is still essentially the current list, where China and India are still there, but now you're only down to Russia. And then by 2050, you have none in Europe. But okay, so where's all that growth coming from? It's essentially Africa. That by 2050, here's 4 of the top 10 will be in Africa. What else is changing? Notice by Japan. Okay, but then you have 2 still south of the United States in the Western Hemisphere. China and India are still going to be number 1 and 2, but it'll be flipped by 2050. But most of the growth right now in our world is in Africa, and most of the countries losing population are in Europe. So we have these 2 different dichotomies going on, where we have some places in the world where population is still going up at rapid rates, but we have other parts of the world where population is in decline, and they have 2 very different problems. This is just a cardiogram of the world. So China and India are huge. It's just a cardiogram of the world for population. Urban or rural, you live in a unique time period in human history for a lot of reasons. One of them is because we are more urban than we have ever been. Ever been. And that number is only going to continue to grow. Now, the other part of 2.1 population distribution is how we are distributed within an area. So carrying capacity is how many people a piece of land can it support. One of the ways how we can tell that is by density. Arithmetic population density is just people divided by land. That's all that is. And so you don't really learn a ton from that. This one, when you hear just population density, that's what it's commonly referring to as. This is people divided by land. It doesn't say anything, though, about the land itself. It doesn't say anything about how they're distributed within the land. And so this is in general. When you think about population density, this is what it can kind of tell us, that the population, the same number of people live here as in all the different blue regions. I mean, so what does that tell us? I mean, it tells us this is being greatly overused. So this is arithmetic density. The second one, this is population density at the state of scale. You can just see, I mean, we're so much more urban in some parts of the country, but then you get out to the western part, the part of the country, the plains area, yeah, we're way less. More population distribution just shown differently. Europe. This is the most densely populated area ever. This is the Kowloon walled city. China basically said we're going to give up on it, and they had 50,000 people in 6.4 acres. It essentially was a self-governing, no government-controlled area, but they kind of kept everything in control themselves. Being drug lords and stuff would go there to hang out, but until China came in and bulldozed it down. London, so the scale of the city. Now, physiological density. Physiological density looks at people divided by arable land, so it really shows how much pressure is being put on land there. And so you can see like Egypt's really high, Iceland's really high, Japan, South Korea. So it's places where you don't have a lot of farmland, essentially, and you have a lot of people. So this is a great number for geographers to use, because really it shows you how much stress is being put on land and how are there the right amount of people there for the resources. Now, are you using those resources efficiently? That's what's called an agricultural density, where that is farmers per arable land. So, for instance, notice that Japan greatly dropped here. That's because they're using their land pretty efficiently. Egypt's still pretty high. Iceland's still pretty high. Netherlands, which is really high in physiological density, is low on agricultural density because they're using their land efficiently. Agricultural density is a pretty good look at development level of a country as well. So when you look here at Egypt, about 90% of Egypt you can't live on. It's over 90% of the population lives with. It's 98% of the country you can't live on. It's 90% of the population lives within 20 miles of the Nile River. Well, that means that the density, the arable density is going to look. Or I'm sorry, the arithmetic density is going to look okay. But the physiological density is not going to look good at all, because just much of the land cannot be used. Basically, whenever you see a APU and geography question, multiple choice question around density, and you don't know the answer in Egypt of choice, pick Egypt. Okay, here's some other countries showing this. So this shows a pretty high development level of Canada, low agricultural density. It shows a ton of stress on Egypt's land. It shows that while Japan has a lot of stress on their land, they're using what they have pretty well. Same with the Netherlands. Bangladesh, this shows you have a lot of people. Things you should know. You should know how to apply the 3 different types of density, for sure. Then you should also know some just trends of population, of where people are and what we see moving forward.